last week we discussed Bitcoin and the new technologies that it brought to the table. One of these technologies being blockchain. Can you tell us more about what blockchain is?
Sure. So blockchain is, in layman's terms, is
Okay.
basically a database on steroids. So if you go to the doctor's office and they misspelled your name, for example, they can go into the database record and modify your name, and then you're good to go. Not so with blockchain. If the blockchain was at your doctor's office, there would be a record or a history that your name was misspelled.
Gotcha.
Because once that record is set, it can't be modified.
Undone.
Yeah, so that's really nice for currency, right? If I send you $1, there's a record that it says I sent you $1, and there's no way to reverse that. That's in history that I sent you $1. So it's different than if I were to send you $1 via email. Because if I send you $1 through email, the dollar is still sitting in my sent mail, and I could send you another $1, but it's just a replica of the first record.
Okay.
Can't do that with blockchain. So what's interesting about blockchain is that it's going to revolutionize our economies because of that one simple trait.
So what kind of standards does it run on?
So every blockchain has its own standard. So Bitcoin has its own standard, and that's its own blockchain. There's tons of blockchains that are out there, and so most of them are permissionless. So that means that anybody from wallet to wallet can transfer anything they want between each wallet address.
Okay.
Okay. The difference is what's about to happen is the standard, and we're going to talk about that application in regard to the history of the internet again. Okay, so
Everything repeats.
Everything repeats. And if you look at how TCP/IP changed things in regard to the standard, you couldn't put anything on the network without it being controlled by TCP/IP.
Gotcha.
Okay? Primarily TCP. You can send anything you want by IP, the Internet Protocol, but if it's not of the standard, it'll be tossed out.
What is the TCP/IP standard for blockchain?
So the standard for blockchain, and it was established in 2004, it appears to be ISO20022.
Okay.
And what that actually does is the control mechanism that they're going to use in order to transfer large sums of money. So if you look at Bitcoin, okay, Bitcoin can change and control money from wallet to wallet with no problem. But as we talked about in that episode, okay, if it takes 4 hours and no one knows where your money is, okay, the banks aren't going to likely to appreciate that. Okay, so what they did was they're going to use a standard, the ISO20022 standard. So if you look at that from that perspective, Ripple and XRP, Ripple would be the control protocol,
TCP.
the TCP portion of the IP, which is going to be XRP.
Gotcha.
So a lot of times people look at XRP and be like, oh, that's Ripple. And it's actually not. XRP is much like Bitcoin. And so you don't need to use Ripple to use XRP. So there's two completely different things that are going on there. One is connection oriented, which is going to be Ripple. When they communicate with all the banks, there's going to be a control in those banks, and that's going to be the Ripple software that'll control the money that gets written on XRP.
So what are some advantages of this ISO 20022?
Yeah, so one thing with ISO 20022 is compatibility. So while XRP and Ripple have their thing going,
Yeah.
there's going to be other blockchains like, for example, XDC and Zinfin. Zinfin's going to be the control, and XDC is the blockchain. But what combines these all together will be the standard of ISO 20022. So blockchains in and of themselves aren't inherently ISO 20022, but the software that gets written on top of that highway, if you will,
Okay.
is going to be the standard.
And you see this standard moving forward in Web3?
I think the only way to actually allow the banks to actually communicate, and they'll be comfortable with moving millions, in some cases billions of dollars through these networks, there has to be some sort of control protocol. It can't be just the simple highway of blockchain. It will be a controlled mechanism. And so the ISO20022 standard, I think, would answer any kind of qualms about
Where we're headed.
where we're headed, yeah.
Okay, so what's the difference? I guess this is being the difference between XRP and, let's say, Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin doesn't have this standard?
Yeah, so I think the primary difference with that is Bitcoin is simply the blockchain.
Yeah.
It's a blockchain. And if you look at the technology behind that blockchain, it's super slow, low transactions and things like that. So the standard will probably not be used on that blockchain because of the hooks and the given road, if you will, of that blockchain. So the newer blockchains that are created with way faster transactions. For example, XRP does 1,500 on-chains, 1,500 transactions per second versus
That's fast.
versus Bitcoin, which is only 7 transactions per second, or XDC, which is 2,000 transactions per second and settles in 2 seconds. Like, that's like really, really fast. And so the faster the highway that you have, the more efficient the control mechanism on top of that highway can be. If you have a really slow highway, okay, and then you add all this control on top of it, there's no possible way that you can get it faster.
Yeah.
So the highway itself has to be really, really quick in order to handle this.
So what currencies have this standard that, this ISO 20022 standard?
So there's like 6 or 7 of them that have it. XRP, XLM, I think XDC has it, and a bunch of other ones. And you can go out and research those.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, in regard to the financial institutions and currencies, there has to be some sort of control mechanism in order for that to happen.
So what you're saying is if I'm interested in, purchasing different coins, it's the coins that have this standard that will be more successful in the long run as opposed to coins that don't have this standard?
So yes, I think there's going to be a basket of currencies that are going to be ISO 20022, and those particular coins I think would interest me if I was an investor. Now, you go out and do your own research, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But I do believe that if we look at the history of the internet and where we go, it's going to be in that basket of ISO 222 currencies because of that control mechanism.
Okay.
So the other advantages of ISO 222, aside from compatibility, because XRP will be used in this country most likely. If you go out to Europe or Asia, they're using other ISO coins to do those transactions. And to communicate between the two, there has to be some kind of control set. And that's where ISO 222 comes in again.
Okay, so you brought up a point where everything is in layers. The original edit can be edited. Another layer goes on top of it to fix it. So on the ledger, is there any way to keep it, private?
So they're going to have side chains that eventually go back to the main chain. So in regard to privacy, the ledger is public.
Okay.
So you're going to see huge amounts. In fact, if you go on X and follow some of these whale transmissions, you could see how much is being transferred over the wire. Now, the privacy aspect of it really depends on what you mean by privacy.
Well, do you see their name? Do you see who's making these transactions?
So the only thing you can see are wallet addresses, and they're
All right.
really huge, long hexadecimal numbers that are out on that chain. Now, if you associate those wallet addresses with a given institution, you're going to see
who it is.
Yeah, who it is. Yeah.
Okay.
That's almost like DNS. Like if you go to Google.com, you go to a DNS server, a domain name server, and then that translates the IP address into what we know as Google.com, right?
Gotcha.
So I think that there might eventually be some sort of DNS service that gets applied to these wallet addresses.
So it'll make it much more fluid for customers.
So yeah, so if I want to email my friend, I would just say, hey, I'm going to email Pete.
Yeah.
And then, or send money to Pete, and then that will translate into their given wallet address.
Is there any other advantages to ISO?
So there are. I mean, I think one of the big things that, and this is where disruption comes in, is the accuracy of how this is going to go down. Right now, SWIFT loses about 7% of their transactions. So if you're transmitting $5 trillion and you're losing 7% of that, that's a huge amount. So the advantage of this system is that it's going to really reduce errors, because it's going to be very exact as to what wallet you're sending to, and then the control that gets thrown in there all the way through. It's going to, the error will be human error on the one side, on the sender. You know, sending to a wrong address, well, that's a human error. That's you know, you can't do anything about it. But the actual transmission through the system should be flawless.
Do you think that's why people are more hesitant to inquire about these currencies, because the human error that can happen?
No, I think the main thrust of this, I don't think there's going to be a human error aspect of it.
Okay.
I mean, I think there'll be a human error in regard to the wrong address and, you know, clerical errors.
Okay.
But I think once it goes on the system, it's going to be pretty flawless.
So ISO will also help with security then?
ISO will definitely help with security. Yeah, because there won't be, like for example, all the wire frauds that go on. You know, you get there's so many different phishing and different types of wire frauds, and then they can't be pulled back, mainly because of the way SWIFT operates. SWIFT is basically a messaging company, and then they release the money on the other end. Well, with this particular situation is there's going to be a transaction, and you're going to see that transaction go all the way through on the blockchain. That's the beauty of having a public network, is that you can actually see exactly where that money goes.
All right, so to bring it back then, so ISO is the standard, what we discussed in episode 1, and then the disruption is, I guess, the more advanced chains like XRP, XDC, or is it all combined? Is the disruption and standard in the ISO?
So that's a really good question in regard to disruption. You know, with the current SWIFT system, is there are very high fees that are applied to your actually money transitions. So this actually makes it way less. It's way less expensive in order to
make transactions.
To make the transactions, and I think you know, if the fees are reduced, it's going to help the banks, but it's also going to help the end user. And so eventually, I think a lot of the fees that the banks collect go away. So I think that's where the disruption is going to be, because the banks have to re-modify, just modify in general.
Yeah.
They're going to have to re-look at their business plans, because those fees are going to be, they're totally going to go away.
It's changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.